to another episode of Ardent Cinema, the #1 podcast for book club style discussion of all things movies. This is a weekly podcast, and we encourage you to follow along as we take a deep dive into each movie's plot, overall themes, and what we thought of the acting and directing, our feelings on the film, and more. At the end of each episode, we will announce the movie for next week, so make sure to listen until the end. And if you're wondering where the previous host was, well, guess what? I've taken over because this is the first episode of Spooktober. We will be having 4 episodes this month of pure horror.
I'm scared.
So stay tuned and enjoy. I am your vampiric host, Daniel Alexander.
And I'm your frightened host, Sean. I look forward to being scared this whole month.
And I'm your scared host, Alejandro.
No, you can't. Don't bite my intro.
You're scary. I'm scared.
No, I'm scared. You're scared.
No, he's scared.
Oh, I'm scary and he's scared.
Oh.
This week, we hope you watch along with us for Interview with the Vampire.
And then he took the light of day. You're a vampire. You never knew what life was until it ran out in a red gush over your lips. I can't stand this any longer.
You made us what we are, didn't you?
God kills indiscriminately, and so shall we.
You like dying? You condemn me to hell!
Monster. One happy family.
Take her, Louis! End her suffering and yours! For do not doubt, you are a killer!
I want some more.
The movie came out in 1994, directed by Neil Jordan and written by... Come on, guys. Bonus points.
Anne Rice.
Very good. Anne Rice, who also wrote the novel and its sequels. Ooh,
Mommy!
starring Brad Pitt as Louis, Tom Cruise as Lestat, Antonio Banderas as Armand, Christian Dunst as Claudia, and Christian Slater as Interviewer. Yeah, that is a jam-packed all-star cast, and I'm sure we'll come back to that. I'm going to give a little plot synopsis. You guys mind?
Not at all. Go ahead.
All right. A young man loses everything and everyone he loves, surrendering his mortal life to an undead vampire. But it's a trade. When he wakes, he is now one of the undead.
Oh.
What did you guys think of the film?
I absolutely love this movie. From beginning to end, I thought it was just fantastically done. I felt engaged the entire time. It felt very immersive to me. The eerie backdrops of the New Orleans swamplands was a very unique background for this film. One of many places, because actually, they go to Paris and they go to many other locations.
Well, the scenes were actually inspired by paintings. That was their biggest inspiration for the swamp scenes, actually.
Yeah, it was incredibly beautiful, and although they were realistic locations, it still had a very surreal feeling to them.
Yeah, you mentioned those paintings. There's a scene about midway through the movie after they moved to Paris where they're talking about the different locations that they are looking for the vampire clan or guild, however you want to call it. And the way that they showcase the areas that they go to is through Claudia's, the young girl that they recruit, partially through the movie. It's her paintings of the different locations. So, now that you mentioned that a lot of the film scenes were inspired by paintings, I can totally understand that based off that scene.
And, well, I just want to add that, maybe I'm biased, but I love vampires. I love the Halloween season, so
Nerd.
Excuse me. So this movie in particular, I think actually represents the best version of a vampire, a better version than most other movies. I mean, except maybe Nosferatu.
Yeah,
or Dracula.
this one came out in '94, like I had said, and I really felt like it changed the landscape in terms of how vampires were portrayed after that. You had some sexy examples of vampires in media, like there's a movie called Blood for Dracula in '74, but that's kind of underground softcore porn kind of stuff, slightly theatrical. But after this, you have Twilight, you have half a dozen teen heartthrob drama shows, and I don't feel like any of that would have existed without this movie.
Yeah, well, I guess that for that part of it, I wish it wouldn't have brought all that along with it, but because I think it went in the wrong direction. But
Well, like any swing in culture, it's going to go too far and then it's going to come back.
right,
You know?
right. But yeah, this was the spot that I thought really hit the mark.
Was this film a massive hit in theaters?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Okay, that explains it. Because sometimes you get films that have like a cult like status after the fact, but they bomb, in their initial run. So I don't always see a shift in culture for films like that. Usually it's big tentpole films like a Star Wars or I guess this film Titanic, things like that. So okay, interesting.
You'd imagine it's pretty hard for it to fail with that kind of all-star cast. You had some of the biggest stars of the age coming up then, really coming into their own. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Kirsten Dunst.
Mm-hmm.
Can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, and I believe Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt won Oscars for their roles in this film as well.
I didn't
did
know
they?
that. Okay.
Cool.
Tell me, which character did you guys kind of connect to? Who did you like?
I personally really enjoyed Tom Cruise's character, actually, Lestat. Even though he is less likable of the three, per se, he had a certain playfulness and charm to him, but like a cynical playfulness that I really enjoyed on screen. And I thought he was very exciting to watch. And I bet both of you are probably thinking, Tom Cruise being a pick for this movie seems a little strange, or it would be unusual, especially knowing what Tom Cruise has done after that. But in my opinion, he really lands this role really well.
Yeah, and from the interviews I've seen, it appeared that he was a genuine fan of the story and really delved into the character to try and get the correct interpretation, really pull it off the page. He understood the dynamism, the energy, the subtlety, the narcissism, even the insecurities of the character really came out perfectly.
It's interesting you mentioned Tom Cruise may not have seemed like a good fit for this at first, but we have to remember a lot of his early film work was more varied than what it is now. A lot of what he does now is very samey. He's like the hero, that struggles, but ultimately prevails, right? But back then, the 80s and 90s, a lot of his film roles were more unique. They were more willing to showcase him in a vulnerable position, whereas now a lot of his films are more vulnerable in terms of like action and him like overcoming like a physical a challenge rather than like a mental or physiological or psychological challenge. So
The challenge of looking tall.
oh my goodness.
Well, you say that, and you're right. You have a good point. But actually, at the time, well, you know how book fans can be. There was a lot of debate about whether he was the right choice, because Lestat was across the board people's favorite character, so they were very sensitive about it.
Yeah, and even though his roles may have been more unique in the past relative to his role in this film, it was still very out of left field for him to do.
Yeah, a detail about him that I like is that he's clearly the villain for a large part of the story, but from his perspective, there obviously is no villain. There is no good and evil, but also he sees the gift that he's giving, what he calls the dark gift, to be a really special, unique thing that they should be grateful for. And the tragedy is that they can't see his perspective because he's the powerful one. He's the one with the dynamism moving the story. And they hate him for his gift. And they don't see... I think the character genuinely loved Louis and Claudia.
I would say so, in his own way, for sure. He definitely had a different way of showing that than, say, Louis, who was a bit well, not a bit. He was very brooding.
Very sensitive boy.
The character was basically regret and sadness all rolled up into one. I mean, considering his past where his wife had passed away at the intro of the movie, and that explains his overall mental state when he meets Lestat, or rather when Lestat meets him, and his willingness to just try something else because otherwise he was just going to end his life one way or another, whether it was through inciting some violence from somebody else, or at the end of a bottle, or what have you, or at the end of a knife. So I think for him, he's a good counterpoint to Lestat, who's much more into the idea of being an immortal, and for him, the gifts that come with that, and the special treatment that he gets, or that he feels like he's owed as a result of being this immortal being that is more powerful than any of the other creatures around him, whether it's the rats, birds, or even the humans around him. He treats a lot of the people around him as basically just cattle, basically just food.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Well, first of all, I believe he's an atheist. He doesn't see any divine moralistic judgment. So from his perspective, then, if he exists, then he's no more evil than a lion or a cat. He's a predator and he's here to kill. But he has so much resentment towards Louis that I feel like he was at one point very similar to Louis, very emotional, empathetic person. And possibly before he even turned into a vampire, he had a lot of traumatic events in his life and became the Lestat that we see. So when he sees Louis' unwillingness or his inability to drop his old mindset, he sees it as a weakness, an inability to grow, but he's also jealous of it. He's resentful that Louis gets to live in this fantasy world where there's this morality and beauty, and he has to be the cold, unempathetic one.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I believe. Well, in the film, they say at multiple points that each vampire has a different gift within the vampiric gift itself. Different abilities, like being able to read minds, or other, maybe fly or float, I guess. And throughout the film, I was kind of thinking that Louis' gift was the gift of human emotion, because the whole, most of the time I was trying to think, well, what's his power, because he never did anything quite special per se. But then if you think about the film, he's the only one really having that level of empathy, more so than any other vampire.
Yeah, and it's like Armand says later in the story that this stone-like mentality is what eventually kills them. The world moves on and they cannot. They're stuck in place, and eventually they off themselves at some point because they can't bear the world. And that probably, well, Louis goes through quite a transformation, but that probably won't happen to Louis because he's able to connect with the people around him.
Right.
Yeah, I would say Louis, I don't know if he feels like it's a gift so much, just because, for a lot of the early film, he's trying to get away from this nature. He's rebelling against this nature, so much so that he's basically just surviving. Only when he and Claudia move away from Lestat and they're in Paris and they are living their own life for a brief period of time are they happy. And because, he finds contentment in his companion. But when he's by himself, I get the sense that he's just kind of wandering around and just kind of surviving and getting by as opposed to really living. So for him, I don't know if he would consider it a gift, this feeling of human emotion.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was quite clear that he didn't feel that the dark gift was a gift at all, because only in the very beginning, when he was first turned and he saw this new beauty in the world, and when it was fresh. But then when he realized what he had to do to maintain this gift, which was to kill humans and drink their blood, he resisted it. He didn't want to do that. So he tried for the longest time to just, eat rats and birds. And I think his vampiric power, like the special power that he has of keeping that level of humanism in him, is also what made accepting the gift much harder for him.
But he did accept it.
He did eventually accept it, but he had to go through one last great trauma in order for that to break.
Well, no, I mean literally in the beginning, Lestat gives him the choice.
Oh, yes.
And he accepts it, which is why I'm kind of annoyed when he and Claudia use Lestat as a scapegoat for their anger.
Well, true, but to be fair, he was suicidal. He was about to, and he was very drunk.
Right.
He was very drunk when he accepts this gift. Lestat, I feel, uses that, because throughout the film, Lestat is very manipulative.
Absolutely.
He uses anything in his power, anything in the human psyche to find what you desire and twist it to get what he wants. And he knew that, he had been kind of stalking Louis in the beginning, kind of watching him, seeing his suffering, and also seeing that he was inebriated.
But he gives him the choice twice. First when he's inebriated above the boat, and then again in the Louisiana swamp when he's not inebriated. He gives Louis the choice between death and vampirism, and Louis chooses it twice.
Oh, true. So yeah, he can't really blame Lestat per se, but he can blame Lestat for keeping him around, because he had wanted to break free, but he couldn't emotionally from Lestat, because he felt like that was the only connection he had left in the world, or the only other person who can really understand him now in this new form. And then the moment he tried to really break away, Lestat used Claudia against him to keep him there still.
Yeah, I don't doubt that there's there's a lot of manipulation there, but I think Louis transfers too much responsibility onto Lestat instead of accepting that he saved his life in a sense. Louis was going to kill himself.
I think even more so Claudia is really
let's talk about Claudia. Claudia is this little girl that Lestat transforms in order to manipulate Louis into raising her and keeping him around, emotionally invested. And she is in a plague-filled neighborhood. Her father has run off, her mother is dead, and she's going to go soon. And for whatever reason, I don't remember. I read the book, but it was a while ago, and I don't remember if this was different in the book. But Louis and Lestat refused to tell her the truth that they honestly saved her life. Up until the end of the movie, she has this interpretation, and they never correct her, that they snatched her out of her crib somehow and took her away from her family.
Yeah, that they snatched her out of her mother's hand, which, it was the mother's corpse's hand. Like she thought,
I don't think she knows that.
When she was, I don't know if she had the plague at that moment or something, or the early form of the plague. But yeah, she thought her dead, rotting mother's
corpse. If she didn't, she would have just starved there.
Was alive. Yeah, she was just sitting by it, just kind of waiting for the mom to, I don't know, move or react. So yeah, it's interesting to think the whole time that she thought the mother was alive and she was just taken.
I think that's part of just Louis being an ultra good guy kind of mentality. He doesn't want to take away her anger. Like, she places her anger onto them and mostly onto Lestat, and he wants to let her have that.
I mean, he does admit that he did bite her and essentially did kill her, and only Lestat came in afterwards and transformed her.
Yes.
So, yes, you're right. You guys are right in terms of saying that, yeah, they held on to that for too long. I mean, I guess I could understand because essentially they're culpable in her quote-unquote murder and rebirth. And I guess they want to keep her childlike innocence.
But you'd think cold, logical vampires would be able to explain to her that it was death or vampirism. You were going to die there.
Yeah, but Louis is the opposite of that. Exactly.
That's Louis' trait. And Lestat, I think, just didn't care, didn't bring it up.
Right. Yeah, she's, since we're talking about Claudia, she's an interesting character. She kind of, I'll be honest with you, she kind of creeped me out.
Oh, very creepy.
Throughout the film. Partly in her actions, but partly in her relationship with Louis. At times she would call him her beloved, and, she loves him almost in a romantic way as opposed to a father-daughter way.
Yeah, it's more than almost. I agree.
Yeah, I actually believe that they had a romantic partnership as well.
Oh,
That's
I don't.
kind of the hint.
You think they physically had a relationship?
I mean, well, not in the sense, not in the human sense, because vampires are well, according to what I know from the books, vampires in that world are asexual
Right.
beings, and the way they view companionship and I guess love is different than humans. So with that being said, and with that being said, I do think that Louis and Claudia had something that was almost a mix of a father-daughter figure, but also had that vampiric romanticism embedded, especially because, she doesn't grow physically, but she does grow mentally.
Yeah,
Some-
100%.
So
it's
she
both.
she is an older person, even though she looks like she's like 12.
Yeah.
30 years had passed with the three of them living together. So I would definitely agree that mentally she definitely did grow up, but she did still hold on to some naivete about the world and about, how to treat others. And because of the fact that her parents were basically just Louis and Lestat, two, either cold or an emotionless or like overly emotional people that, there was no real balance in her life to really teach her how to comport herself as an adult. It was more just live by the moment, basically.
Right. And well, another argument in favor of her having a relationship beyond father-daughter with Louis was, one specific scene where she calls him my love and kisses him on the lips. So there's that scene. And then also there is a jealousy when she sees Louis interacting with Armand, when Armand is giving them the tour throughout the catacombs in France. And you see that because she's afraid that she's going to lose Louis to him, because she's like, I see the way you look at him.
Exactly. It doesn't matter that he's a man because they don't have sexual feelings.
Exactly.
But it's still this emotional attachment that she feels is going away.
It is currently happening. Like she knew from the start that Armand has an interest to Louis and wants to take him away.
In the same way Lestat did, to feed off of his energy and his uniqueness.
Exactly. And if there was no bond like that between them, then that would never have been a worry or an issue.
And in addition to that same scene where she's worried that Louis is going to abandon her for Armand, she calls herself dangerous. She's seen that whether it's because she can read their minds or she just notices the way that they treat her towards the end of like all three of their relationship with one another. But she gets this idea that, she is a danger, not just to, the populace around, but to even Louis and Lestat. I mean, earlier on, she goes and basically kills Lestat once, or nearly kills him, which that was a shocking scene.
Yeah, so it seems like what the danger they're talking about is, one, that she's amoral, even more so than an adult vampire. And also, I think there was a hint that maybe if she became accepted, that more vampires would transform children, which is a dangerous thing in of itself.
They want the person who's transformed to have some life experiences and to understand the way that the world works so that they're able to live within those bounds, right? Even with the Vampire Guild in Paris, while they're out and out, kind of, sort of saying that they're vampires, but in a cheeky way, they're not just going around wantonly killing people in full view of everyone, right? So, or at least they're not doing it in a way that would arouse suspicion. Whereas a child has no basis or understanding of, how to, again, comport oneself. So they would just rely on their instincts to get them through, basically. So it's interesting that Lestat, I guess, I would imagine he probably knew that, but he did so anyways, I guess. to get back at Louis, or maybe give him a companion, as he says. Like, it's interesting why he ended up turning Claudia in the beginning to begin with. I'm not sure.
Well, I don't necessarily believe that Lestat knew that because, well, as he had stated earlier in the film, he was turned and his master, or I don't know, whatever you call them, the person who turned Lestat just left immediately. He really had no teacher.
By the movie logic, yeah. Apparently in the books, we find out that he was sworn to secrecy, but I guess that's irrelevant to what happens in the movie.
Oh, interesting.
Was it Armand that turned him?
I thought so too, but it's never...
Well, Armand does mention that he did know him. Right?
Yeah.
Know him long enough to not mourn his passing.
Which I thought was BS. Like, I don't think he disliked Lestat to particularly not mourn his loss or to not like him. I think he was reading Louis at that point and figured that was the right thing to say. I'm not saying Armand cried about it, but I don't think he was as cold to Lestat as he puts on.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
Did you guys... oh, yeah, go ahead.
And another reason that I believe the Vampire Guild wouldn't want child vampires roaming is because, well, I think to help keep hidden from humans a little easier as well, because
that's another one. Yeah,
children, within 5 years go through a big physical change, and if the humans don't see that, they just see this little girl 5 years later. Obviously questions are going to be raised. Versus if you're turned, after puberty, or after in your mid-20s, you can kind of hide yourself easier throughout the years for longer, at least maybe 10 years, 15 years.
Good point, yeah.
Well, to add to that danger, another thing I noticed was that it doesn't seem she gains the powers that adult vampires do. No super strength, no super speed, no mind control, no flying. She can manipulate people because she's a child, but it doesn't seem she gets any of those supernatural abilities.
And she can't turn anybody either.
So I can see what they mean when they say she's helpless. Still, I don't fully buy that. I feel like with her wisdom and her years of learning, she'd be able to get by just fine, but it absolutely is a bigger risk.
I do believe she has some level of enhanced strength.
Possibly. We don't see it. I'm sure she'd be stronger than the average girl, right?
Well, you do see it a little bit. Like, for example, when she first gets turned and you see Lestat giving her his blood, she's able to hold Lestat for quite a bit as he's trying to pull away. And if she had little girl strength, I don't think it would have been that difficult for him. That didn't seem like she was
physically holding him. It seemed like she was... I don't know, that seemed like a mental hold to me. Like she was drinking his blood too vigorously, and that weakened him as opposed to her being strong.
Okay.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, that could be. That could be.
Did you guys think about the possibility of Lestat's death being a metaphor for a period?
You mean like an age moving on? Like the...
So Claudia doesn't really...
age?
Yes. So Claudia doesn't really transform into a woman. She doesn't start wearing women's clothes, and she's not more mature until after this point when she kills Lestat, or, quote, kills Lestat. And we see his blood going over the floor, and she looks at it, and she gets scared, and she's uncomfortable by it, which is weird for her. And then after that point is when she becomes a woman and starts acting romantic towards Louis and coming into her own. So I just thought... maybe it was intentional, maybe not, but it seemed like a puberty metaphor.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I thought you meant more of a time period.
Passing. Oh, yeah, it wasn't clear. Yeah.
Okay. I can definitely see that. As we've talked about before, the way that she is growing up is just through her experiences with Lestat and Louis.
Right, so it's a non-literal transformation into the next stage of her life.
Right, because right before that, as she gets ready to kill him, she gets furious with them and she cuts her hair, and then you see her hair just grow back immediately. So much so that, she at that point feels trapped. Yeah. So anything that she can do to escape, she does, and when she feels like she's finally escaped, it transforms her. Mentally at the very least. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. definitely feels like a representation of her moving into womanhood. Also because Lestat was the one kind of holding her back from womanhood. Like he would always kind of treat her.
It's
like
true. He
this
treated her like a doll. Yeah.
Yeah, like this doll or this little kid, even though it had been many years. She even told him one time, why do you always curl my hair like a little girl or like a doll? So she was always fighting against Lestat for that. So yeah, I believe it is very symbolic that killing him and having that blood pool representing puberty and womanhood. You know, obviously spoiler alert, but he survives.
Oh yeah, that was a quote killing.
Quote killing. Yeah, he survives. How? I don't know, because
Well, this is a good conversation. Go ahead.
okay, so first she tricks Lestat by bringing him these two boys who she claims were heavily intoxicated from brandy, as gifts, like to make peace with Lestat after the big fight that they had. So Lestat goes ahead and starts drinking from one of them, and it is revealed that she poisoned them
With laudanum.
Laudanum. I'm not entirely sure what that is.
No idea.
But apparently it is very potent and very good against vampires.
Well, it's not the poison that hurts them; it's that they're dead. The laudanum is to keep their blood warm.
Oh, okay.
Right, and
okay.
The cold blood is what the poison is.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was a mixture of the poison and the blood, but maybe the poison didn't do anything. So yeah, he drank dead blood and a lot of it, and you see how that begins to really start weakening him and slowly killing him. And then you see Claudia go behind him and just slit his throat. And I mean
I'll put you in your coffin.
I'll put you in your coffin!
I mean a deep slice, really deep. And this guy gets drained.
He transforms. You see him get
all
more
the blood
frail.
he's ever drank spills out of him.
Yeah, he looks like skin and bones at that point. It was gruesome to see. And on top of that, they wrap him up, like tie him up, and they take him to the edge of the swamp, and they throw him in alligator infested water. So I thought, okay, he's gone. There's no way this guy's gonna get out of that. So what did you guys think about that?
I was pleasantly surprised. No, legitimately, I was pleasantly surprised that he lived. Because usually you have movies that if they quote unquote kill a character, unless you see it happen and it's like gruesome and violent, then they probably will live and they'll come back at some point. So here, seeing that and seeing all the ways basically
you were like confirmed dead.
Well, so I go, wow, they kill him about halfway through the movie, and then when he comes back, I literally have a note here that says he lives.
With a great reveal.
Definitely great
Amazing.
reveal. And then he talks about having to feed on animals around there, like the crocodiles, to get enough blood to be able to get back to them.
Yeah, and the toads and the snakes.
And
Yeah.
physically becomes a representation of what he's been feeding on.
Right. And he even goes, Claudia, you've been a very, very naughty girl.
Naughty little girl.
Which I don't know if that's a known quote, but hearing that I was like, wow, I'm surprised that that's not like a huge quote that a lot of people say nowadays, because the way that he said that was so ghoulish, but just delivered so great that I was like, wow, I'm just, I got a little goosebumped when I heard that. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's gonna attack him now.
Well, the piano piece that he's playing is the exact same piece that he played earlier, but only at half tempo, which was a nice little nod to kind of his degraded self, but he's still fully there,
And I just love that reveal. Like when, so you hear like a knock on the door, Louis goes, opens it. At first, he doesn't see anybody. He's a little confused. And suddenly he just pops out of nowhere. He still has his speed and his strength to a certain degree. Maybe not
insane.
completely, but he's still very powerful. Louis manages to run and grab Claudia and start running upstairs, and then boom, suddenly he pops
Even
at the
compared
piano.
to them, he's
Yeah.
moving as a dash.
Yeah. Suddenly you hear the piano playing, it cuts to him, and that was such a beautiful scene. I love it. One of my favorite scenes of the film.
What can kill a vampire seems to depend on how powerful they are. And we know the older you get, the more powerful you become. Which is why I think maybe you also came to this conclusion that he might be Armand's pupil. He seems to be very old and very powerful. Fire can't kill him. Fire kills most vampires. He would probably survive a dismemberment. He can go ages without drinking. He's got to be one of the oldest.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, he probably can't survive a beheading. I don't think he would survive that.
I think they can survive dismemberment. The strong ones can.
You think so?
Well, we see that with the Vampire Guild later on that Louis goes up against, that when he starts setting them ablaze, you know, a lot of them are flying around, which is I don't know about you guys, but it was kind of funny just seeing them all just flying around, just crashing into walls. But there was one that he beheads, and you see the head on fire still kind of like shuffling around screaming. So like they can survive the beheading seemingly, but then I guess with the added fire, then that, you know.
Yeah, he's got a multi-kill them.
Or someone has to put the head back or attach it, right? If you're beheaded.
Maybe they regenerate
Maybe.
From the body or the head?
from the head.
Oh, that's something I don't want to think about.
And well, I think no matter how old you are, I think the sun is pretty much deadly.
That's the guarantee kill. And I think that's actually what kills most of the vampires in the guild at the end, which is it's not the burning or dismemberment that weakens them to a point of incapacitation, but the fact that the structure is destroyed by the fire means the morning light is going to flood into the building and kill them all.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they're all too immobilized to get out of there.
I'm sure some of them were killed by the fire. Like, there's got to be weaker vampires who can get taken out by that.
For sure.
That's headcanon, I imagine it.
And I want to go back 1 second to the attempted murder on the stat. I don't know what you guys think, but I personally feel like it wasn't entirely justified per se in terms of
Hell no.
How-
Like I said before, he's a scapegoat. There's no way he deserved that.
yeah, like he never really felt like an antagonist to me. I never felt like he was physically holding these people down.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, they were just putting all their emotions onto him. They never really attempted to run away together or anything like that. They just were just upset, and instead they wanted to do this melodramatic kill instead of any actual.
Well, don't throw too much blame on Louis. He was kind of an observer for this.
Oh, right,
That
Louis.
was all Claudia.
Yeah. Louis was an observer, but he didn't try to stop it either. You know,
Like, he is the most passive protagonist you will ever find up
Yeah.
until the very ending. That's the unfortunate part of his character.
yeah, that's true. Until he needs something absolutely drastic, and that wasn't drastic enough apparently.
Nope.
For him to do any kind of action. But yeah, I just felt like it definitely wasn't justified. I was upset that they were killing him. Because I mean, I love the character. I mean, even though he's an asshole, he's manipulative, but beyond that, I don't really see him as a villain. And I don't disagree with his thoughts on drinking blood to survive. I mean, that's just what that species does. It's the food chain.
Yeah, he calls them insane. Like,
Yeah.
like a cat who just wants to eat grass. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a lion trying to eat its prey, like you said earlier. It's natural. They're not antagonists of the world. They're purely doing what their instincts tell them to do.
Very powerful instincts. Yeah.
Right. I would say one thing just to add on to that is I do think Louis was totally against the idea of killing, but I could see from his perspective that Lestat a lot of the time enjoyed the hunt and would play with his food, so to speak.
Yeah.
Especially the scene where they're in their new apartment after Louis burns the plantation down, and Lestat is basically playing with the two prostitutes, just messing with them. So I think in that regard, I can see Louis' growing, I guess, disgust with the way Lestat goes about feeding. And I would agree with him there because it really does seem like he's just playing with his food at that point.
Well, I honestly feel that the only reason Lestat was kind of prolonging the death of those prostitutes was because he's trying to get Louis to eat.
To move to action.
To move to action, because he was trying to force that reaction to him, because he kept eating rats, and I think Lestat really cared about Louis.
Lestat always did play with his food, but it was more he enjoyed the game of seduction and getting them to drop their guard, but he didn't really make them suffer when it was just him.
Exactly. Like the first prostitute he killed quickly. He drank her blood till she died. And then the second one, he seduced her enough and drank some to like keep her, semi-immobile. Almost like a mother bird feeding their baby birds a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, here, drink. He even opened her up with his little...
thimble.
Thimble.
It's a thimble.
Yeah. So his little thimble on his thumb. And I think that was the real reason. Yeah. He mostly liked going after the aristocrats, right?
Yeah, he was a snub.
He was a snob. He wanted that
that I did like about
he
his
wanted
character.
that snobbish blood, that high quality from people that only eat caviar and go to these parties.
Yeah, I feel like he's a holdover from the French Revolution. He didn't like the new democratic changes. Came to New Orleans to follow the aristocrats and stuck around there. That's like his journey.
Yeah, and I mean, his refusal to change with the new world, you see that near the end too. Remember, like when it goes back to modern times. He's still in those clothes. He's still in like French Revolution clothes. He doesn't really he never modernized.
He's adjusting his little puffs. Yeah,
I love that part. I love that very ending, but we'll get back to that. But yeah, so pretty much, yeah, I do not believe that he's an antagonist of this film at all.
What did you guys think of Armand? I really didn't like that character. I felt like he was a liar, a hypocrite. I don't know if he was lying to them or to himself. He had this air about him that he was above it all, that he was over all these performers and fools. But he's their unofficial leader. He probably started the troupe, and he's there with them every night performing. The only thing that's different between him and them is that he's older. He's gotten bored of it. But I don't think that makes him better than them.
I would agree, and Louis even calls him out at the end of their interactions with one another before Louis, I guess, leads back to the New World, where Louis basically says that Armand was complicit in it all, that he was their leader, and he was complicit in, spoiler, Claudia and Madeline, the woman that Claudia tried to recruit, so to speak, or turn into like a mother figure for her.
Yeah, there's no question about that, because during that scene where they're being taken and being put into this locked in this pillar that goes it leads all the way up to the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which essentially that was going to be their death. It was going to be death by sunrise.
Right.
During that, you hear Louis screaming out for Armand, and then you see Armand.
I almost wish they didn't show us.
Yeah, that would have been good. Yeah, you see Armand kind of peeking out of his door, like listening out, and then he closes it and he kind of has his head on the door, because he's kind of feeling a little bit of regret, even though he proudly said that he doesn't feel that kind of thing. He says, "I don't feel regret."
And you can teach me this? Yes. To be without regret? Yes.
But he definitely felt it there, and I do feel.
You think Armand felt regret?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and especially after Louis still left after the fact, after what he did. Armand was willing to let it all burn just to have. Armand was ready to let it all burn just to have Louis.
I think he regrets failing. I don't know if he regrets what he did.
I agree with Alejandro. I think he regrets getting caught by Louis, because he had this idea that he was going to travel the world with Louis, right, and be his mentor and teach him everything that he needs to know. And the fact that Louis knew, ultimately he was the ringleader behind it all, I think he's more remorseful at getting caught. It's like a kid, you catch a kid, stealing from the cookie jar. They're sad they're caught, not that they did the action.
But you don't feel that he showed remorse when Louis was calling to him and you saw that scene of him he looked remorseful and he was alone. It didn't seem like a show for anybody. He closed the door slowly and he kind of had his head against the wall and like he was regretting that decision a little bit. Maybe because he also had condemned Louis. Perhaps that's why. Because they had condemned him to like eternity and
eternal confinement
in the catacombs.
Which, by the way, when you're watching that, don't you have the thought that behind every wall in this castle, there's trapped vampires from who knows how many generations back?
Oh Lord,
yeah.
I got claustrophobic just at that whole scene. Seriously,
that was really good.
That's true. Yeah, that's a scary thought. But yeah, so I guess maybe he felt remorseful just because of that. Like, oh, there goes my chance with him because now I've condemned him for this crime. But then he changes his mind. He goes and he tries to save just Louis, though, because that's all he cares about. So maybe he double thinks. He's like, maybe I can use this. I save him. Claudia still dies. Uses it as a manipulation tactic to then have Louis, be with him once and for all.
Yeah.
I mean, he is the oldest vampire, as he notes. So if there's anyone that's skilled at manipulation, it would be him. So I definitely think that
every interaction, I felt like he was mirroring.
What do you mean?
I felt like he was mirroring Louis' emotions and his thoughts to try and be empathetic.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I guess him being the most powerful vampire would lend him to have powers to be able to, I guess, manipulate people within a conversation, not just being a master of manipulating, events.
Yeah, he's the only one who's able to dive into Louis' head and get Lestat's name out of him. Like the other ones are like, oh, who do you regret harming? They hear his active thoughts, but it seems like Armand can really dive in there.
Well, so that's interesting. I thought that was a case that he just actually knew Lestat, but you're saying that he just read Louis' mind and pulled that name out and made a story about him knowing of him and, being glad that he's gone, basically.
No, I do think he knew Lestat, but he could have been talking about any vampire that transformed him or that he had wronged, but he's able to pull the name Lestat out of him.
Yeah, because he never gave any clue as to who it was. So there's no way he would have just guessed Lestat like that.
Yeah, he's not keeping track on where they go globally,
Well, I mean, he did note that seemingly only one vampire ever went to the New World, and it was Lestat. So maybe he knew. Yeah, he did say that in that conversation where he notes the Lestat's name. Because Louis did mention that he's from the New World, and Armand didn't know that as well. So I got the impression that because he found out that Louis was from the New World, turned in the New World, that it was most likely the one who left from the old world to the New World. Because Armand does make a point of saying that.
Well, I don't think he specifically says that Lestat was the only vampire to go to the New World. I thought he did. Because, how would he know? He's only in charge.
Is he so powerful he can mentally attach himself to all vampires?
Yeah, there's vampires. There must be vampires in other parts of the world. It couldn't just be Paris. So
it's not that hard to make a new vampire. So it's hard to imagine there's not more.
Yeah, so I think that's a long shot. I think I agree more that he read his mind. Yeah, he could have. It's possible he could have pieced this information together and made like an educated guess, and he landed it and went with it.
I thought it was very apropos that the vampires are all actors.
Oh, yes.
Right? It seemed like that's the ultimate dream of Hollywood, where everyone wants to stay young and beautiful and have fun and be promiscuous forever. It's a town of vampires.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up about this idea of what do the vampires and what do some of the events in the film represent to like culture at large. You just talked about eternal youth for these actors, and I wonder if Armand's feelings towards Louis and the way that he describes them in this case, that Louis reflects his age's broken heart with his human soul, an immortal with a mortal's passion.
Vampire with a human soul. An immortal with a mortal's passion.
So that kind of wistfulness of a bygone age, which I think Hollywood really emphasizes and is all about. I wonder if that's the the director and the writer's like interpretation of that idea, but you know, obviously in this new form here.
Yeah, isn't that what Hollywood's always chasing? Authenticity, and then they pervert it into commercialism.
I mean, how many times do we have to see a movie like La La Land coming out and it wins the Oscar? It's the greatest film of that year.
Yeah. I was really impressed with the technical aspects of this film. I was watching some behind the scenes, and they mentioned that the goal of the computer graphics in this movie was not to stand out, but to blend in with all the practical effects, which seems kind of quaint now. A lot of movies try and do that. But in '94, when CGI was very exciting, the prevailing technique was to try and show off and get an Oscar with it and show, it was an arms race. Who could do it better? So you wanted it to be noticed. And they pulled it off. I mean, it's not perfect. It's CGI from '94, but the fact that they do it subtly makes this movie age a lot better than other movies from the mid-'90s, especially big budget blockbusters.
So you're saying Louis and Lestat were CGI?
I hate you. I hate you so much.
I agree that they did it very subtly and very expertly. I really loved the entire look and feel of this film. The only place I really noticed the CGI was during Lestat's death.
The first one?
Yeah, the first one.
Which, by the way, wasn't.
I know.
There's some enhancements on top, but they built a model based off Tom Cruise's performance and actually had animatronics doing that whole dying scene.
See, I was right.
So that's an animatronic with enhanced CG, with CGI enhancements
for
on
detail
top.
and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, I guess the CGI enhancements plus the more unnatural look of the animatronics
makes it feel somewhat fake.
It made it feel like more like a CGI, but that's very interesting.
Yeah.
It definitely created this sense of surrealism to it that made it all the more
creepy.
Yeah, creepy and gruesome. So I really, really enjoyed that. I guess some of the flames were CGI, I would imagine.
The burning Louisiana mansion was from the outside was CGI, but I still thought it was incredibly proficient, because you see movies coming out in current day
that
have terrible fire.
Yeah, no, the fire was really well done.
That's a hard effect.
Yeah, it wasn't like super noticeable to me.
No.
I was just kind of guessing based on just imagining how they would have done it. They wouldn't have burned down a Louisiana mansion, I think. Then again, that film I think had a pretty high budget for
yeah, but still those are historical buildings and stuff,
right?
You can imagine.
So I just imagined that, but it never took me out of the film. I never thought, like, while watching it, oh, that's clearly CGI.
I didn't know until I watched the special features. It didn't take me out at all.
And just overall, yeah, I just loved it visually. And also, I loved the music. The soundtrack was overall very well done. I thought just the use of, Gothic and classical choirs and strings and harpsichords. Obviously that was the genre of music to use, and they chose some very good pieces.
I have something to add to that, but I think Sean has a point.
Well, I guess I'll just pivot over towards Danny's point here about the sound effects, because there were times at the inciting action where the piano would play loudly and suddenly, or the horns would play loudly and suddenly, like when Lestat was being burned to death in the apartment. The horns were just swelling, the piano was just playing dissonantly. It was very intense, and like a lot of the musical cues really amplified the I guess the horrific or suddenly gruesome moments, and I think really did an effective job of like keeping me in the moment. And in many cases there was a little bit of frightfulness from my end because of all, like, not just the visuals that were occurring, but also the like the sound that was really amplifying it. It really got me in the mood to like continue watching this film, which was, I think, a really good service that this film did.
I completely agree, and I love the interplay between the soundtrack and also the actual piano being played in the film. I thought that those transitioned really beautifully, and it almost made me feel like at times I was watching, a vampire version of Amadeus. A little bit, along with the set pieces, because the New Orleans is very heavily influenced by French culture. So a lot of the locations that they were in were very had that architecture. So it was really beautiful to see and to hear together.
A cool choice they made was that the score always reflects the place and time period in which it's in. Were you gonna say that?
I was gonna mention the very end. Guns N' Roses' "Sympathy for the Devil" was playing at the very end of the movie. Modern times. As Lestat is reborn, so to speak, which I thought was very apropos for the moment. So yeah, that definitely highlighted the idea that music, as we progressed through the ages, the music got more, in some ways, complex, and then it came to more vocal at the very end.
Well, they literally used the instruments that would have been available and would have been played at that time and place.
Right.
And they reincorporate that with the modern age.
I can't believe how great of a film this looks, where most of it seemingly was shot predominantly at night.
Oh, yeah.
You don't see, at least I don't see too many films that are shot at night or set at night looking all that great. Usually they're a little more, you see a little more effects because of the low lighting aspect. But here, even when Louis is walking down for the upteenth time, a dark, spooky alleyway, I just think to myself, man, this is just shot so wonderfully. And it really goes back to Alejandro's point from the beginning, where a lot of the set design and the way the film looks is based off of paintings. And I think they really captured that, and they really did a fantastic job of, despite the fact that everything's set at night, that everything looks beautiful, and there's no struggle to really understand what's going on. Everything that you see is what's there.
Yeah, fake night can often be distracting. You see a blue light filter and it's overly bright, and okay, yeah, sure, nighttime.
Yeah, I believe the style of painting that they were trying to copy was almost that Italian Renaissance high contrast kind of painting. It's known as chiaroscuro painting.
That's a pull.
Which uses just these high contrasting lights and darks to be able to, and it's almost captured in or created in such a surreal way in the painting, because it sometimes does the impossible. For example, it'd be a painting of just a woman in a desk with one candle, but realistically that candle would not light so heavily. And the shift from light to darkness would not be so drastic in a real world setting.
But they're able to mimic that. You
would have a softer fall off, but with the use of color
Boxes,
grading,
different kinds of lights,
and using flags, which is used it's these black, like a black flag that is used to absorb light.
Gotcha.
So put it off to the side, perhaps, to make that transition from light to dark even more contrasted. It draws your eyes to all the lights, and them using the location, the French architecture, that they used a lot of candles for light, that they were able to kind of recreate that, and it was very beautiful.
Since we're on the subject of the technical aspects, the way they created the look of the vampire was very, I don't want to say very unique. It was unique. What they actually ended up doing was having the actors hang upside down until you can see the blood vessels in their face.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And then they had an artist come in and trace it
and accentuate it,
and then they flip them back over, and then the makeup people come in. That's what gives them this baby skin kind of look. You can see the veins coming through their face.
Wow, that is incredible.
I had wondered how they did that.
Yeah, a lot of really cool choices.
Yeah, and beautiful. Those contact lenses.
Dope.
Really well done. Really beautiful. And it's interesting how you see the eyes kind of shift depending on what's going on in the scene. Their eyes would change if they were very thirsty for blood, or if they've just had their fill. It would just shift depending. I thought that was interesting.
Talking about the makeup effects and the way everything looks, I thought the acting on everyone's part really filled the role of what a vampire would be in this universe. Very ethereal, very out of this plane almost, where, you know, you see the way that people walk and interact with one another in the background versus the way that the vampires talk with one another and interact with each other and just move through the space is definitely different, and it's definitely more ethereal and more I don't know what the word would be, but it's more out there, and you could tell there's a clear difference between how the vampires are living in this world and just their thoughts and emotions versus like just general regular people, which I thought was a real benefit to the film, because, you know, you've seen a lot of films with vampires, and for me at least, a lot of times it's this actor's approximation of what a vampire would be, as opposed to them really embodying the role of a vampire, like we talked about Tom Cruise, but even Brad Pitt as well, and a lot of the other characters I thought did a great job like embodying what the director and the writer wanted vampires to be in this universe, and I thought they did it wonderfully.
I completely agree.
Definitely.
I loved I love how they're represented in this film. To me, they seem to have this this elegance and grace in the
Yes.
surface level.
Those are great words to use.
But internally you see them as like they're frightening, they're insidious.
All their elegance is kind of surface level.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not the real them.
The real them is they're fiendish. They and they're also like very secretly uninhibited and impulsive.
Mm.
So you just don't know what they're gonna do next, even though they seem to have this charm on the outside, and that's how they manage to hunt humans. They manage to charm them, to seduce them.
Yeah, that would be the skill they're best at, right?
Yeah,
That's how they do it.
and I absolutely love that.
Yeah, one final thought I had was that I really liked the final conversation between Louis and Armand. It was very homoerotic, very sexually charged.
Everything about this was sexually charged.
Well, that especially. They're in kissing distance, and it looks like they're going to come in for an embrace as they're talking. But the irony is that this is Louis breaking away from those type of relationships of being needed and held by more powerful men. You know, this is him coming into his own and breaking free from these toxic holds. And you see him here in power in front of this much older, more powerful vampire, taking the sexual control and moving the conversation. And then from then on, after that, we see Louis modern age, and he's very sure of himself. He sees Lestat later, you know, no hold over him at all.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I thought that scene was definitely interesting. He was breaking away, but at the same time, you know, you could tell that he didn't want to. You know, he still had a desire. I
The
believe.
desire, sure, but now he had agency. He finally has agency.
Yes.
He has agency, but he also recognizes that he's still failing. Even with the interviewer Malloy, he says, "I have failed again," you know, and trying to at least have someone understand from his perspective. So while he does have agency, now he's trying to learn what that means for himself and how to act upon that.
Yeah, now's the hard part. Now he has to make choices.
Not only does he have to make real choices, informed choices, but now he has to suffer, you know, failure in this agency. Whereas before, you know, he would suffer failures through, you know, other people's choices or being led on by these powerful men. Now that he's on his own, it's really for him a case of adulthood, where now he's out in the world by himself, and now he has to contend with all that and not rely on others, so to speak, to, you know, make his way through this world. So I thought that was, again, going back to your guys' point about the way a lot of the film's themes are centered around transformation. And, you know, a lot of it has to do with not just physical change or the lack thereof in some cases, but also perspective change and contending with that.
And now that you've mentioned like the end of that interview, really quick, I wanted to briefly like go over the very ending because we didn't really talk about it at all.
Sure.
So, you know, pretty much Slater, Christian Slater.
Yeah.
Was it? Christian Slater's character.
Awesome job, by the way. He was great.
Yeah, he was really
A
good.
few scenes, yeah. Malloy, that's his name.
Malloy. So Malloy at the end, even after hearing this whole story of sadness and melodrama and despair, he still finds he finds being a vampire to be very alluring still to him, because it's different to hear someone's sadness than to experience the sadness. You just hear it and you think, oh well, yeah, that sucks. But yeah, once you can never truly empathize with somebody, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah,
It's never the
Louis
same.
always gonna fail there.
Yeah. So he wants Louis to turn him into a vampire.
Mhm.
Louis refuses. He gets upset, and then he kind of just like dashes off. Clearly, he's much faster now because it's been many.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
It's
he's
100
got his full
years.
powers.
Finally, we show his like actual vampiric powers.
Yeah.
And we see him actually have some, agency in using it, not in a heartbreaking moment, but just of his own volition, clear-headedness. So
Do you like this? Do you like being food for the immortals? Do you like dying?
Alrighty. I think I'm ready to get to scores. How about you guys?
definitely.
Yep.
Why don't you start off?
I'm gonna go 8 out of 10.
Reason?
Reason is okay. So 8, obviously a pretty high score. Very good movie. Very great performances. Technical details were spot on. Fun, entertaining, good pacing, all that.
I give it an 8.5 out of 10 vampire bites. So reason is
Drops of blood.
Yes. For everything that Alejandro just said, the reasons why he enjoyed it, I liked it probably a little bit more in those regards, especially the acting. Like I can't get over just how well done the acting was, and how it really made me feel in the moment of all of this occurring. Not many movies can capture me like that. I felt like this one did, so I give it extra points for that.
Cool.
I dropped it a little bit because I like the ending, but it's just out of nowhere, and it's very pronounced, and it seems like it was something that was added for the film rather than a book element. Hearing that there are sequels to at least the books, I'm curious to see how the books would even like go on off this point. So again, it's a little incongruous with everything else that's happened.
A bit of whiplash there, yeah.
Definitely. I started thinking about like how in the world did Lestat get there and all that. So
Mhm.
it took my head out of what's going on in the film, and I started thinking about like the practicalness of everything that's going on. So for me, that ending fell pretty flat for me.
Well said.
Okay. So my score is a 9.2.
Damn.
Oh,
9.2 what?
9.2.
incisors.
9.2
bites?
fangs
Okay.
out of 10. I guess the only thing that doesn't make the score even higher for me was that overall I would have liked to have seen some scenes that kind of pushed the idea that the vampires were asexual versus homosexual. I don't mean that homophobically or anything
I
like
thought
that.
that came across when they seduce women. It's never, and I never get the idea that they're enjoying the sexuality of that. They're enjoying the manipulation.
Yes, but
Mm-hmm.
when you do see more romantic love, it was homosexual.
What romantic love?
Well, like more like the between Lestat and Armand, for example. Like that was the only case.
You mean Louis and Armand?
I mean, sorry, yeah, Louis and Armand. You would see that infatuation, maybe a little bit between Louis and Lestat. You saw a little bit of that. You just didn't really see it with a woman ever. So it kind of felt like constricted to.
Fair enough.
So-
I think it's not that it wasn't there. It just wasn't shown.
Yeah, it wasn't shown. It wasn't shown the same as the homoeroticness of it. Which again, I have nothing. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But it just
that's a Seinfeld moment. Not that there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah. I just felt like it would have been a little more in line, maybe with the books, from what I've heard.
Sure.
You know. So I wanted that point to be thrown in a little bit more, just to show how different vampires are than humans when it comes to sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's the only thing. It's really a really minor.
Yeah, it only brought you down 0.8.
Yeah. Well, no, I guess there are other small little things that could have been made better, but I guess that's like the biggest one that I can think of right now. But yeah, 9.2.
All right, we're at that point now. What have you guys been watching lately? What's kept your interest? Give us a short little version of that.
Sure. Just continuing watching Better Call Saul. Maybe now in the fifth episode, excuse me. It's really engaging. I love the acting. It's definitely more of a character drama than it is a plot-focused drama. And, you know, at this point, I've probably been going about an episode or two a week, which I like. I like that pace. So that's been really keeping me drawn in there. Plus, Multiverses on PlayStation 5. I'm really enjoying playing that. But, yeah, that's about it. What about you, Danny?
I have been playing a little bit of a game, a slightly controversial game.
Dating sim?
No. It's called Death Stranding.
Oh.
Why is that controversial?
Not many people like it.
Yeah, a lot of people
sour on it.
Because of its gameplay and its repetitive gameplay.
No, trust me, a lot of people really excoriated that game.
Internet.
It still counts as controversial.
Okay.
To a degree. So I thought I'd give it a shot. And yeah, I'm pleased to say that I actually really enjoy it.
Gotta try it out soon.
The story is quite interesting. It really drew me in. The characters, the voice acting is all great. Just the mechanics of running around in the world. It feels like the closest thing to a hiking simulator that you'll ever get. And that comes from someone who had just come from Alaska a little while ago and did a lot of hiking. So, you know, when you're constantly just looking at the floor, kind of watching your every step.
Are you secretly Bear Grylls?
I wish. Yeah, I mean, I would love to go to all those locations to some degree.
You didn't confirm or deny it.
That was a confirmation.
Sure. And yeah, so I just thought that was fantastic.
Very
you guys
cool.
should try it out.
Definitely. What, the game or going to Alaska?
Both.
All right. I saw a movie called The Duelists, 1978, Ridley Scott's directorial debut, starring Harvey Keitel and Keith Carradine. It's about Harvey Keitel, who's a big jerk, and is chasing around Keith Carradine's character over the course of 15 years, challenging him to duels over a petty argument. And overall, it was really good. It loses some points because it has some cheesy narration or some weird cuts, but for a directorial debut, it's pretty darn good. I recommend it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna check it out for sure.
Next week's pick is gonna be Videodrome, 1983, directed by the famous, the horrible, the monstrous David Cronenberg. You can find it on Amazon Prime. I don't know where else. You can rent it for $4 there. Buy the Blu-ray if you want. It has a Criterion release. I'm sure Criterion always puts a ton of great features on there. For some of you Zoomers out there, if you don't know who Cronenberg is, if you've seen Rick and Morty and they refer to Cronenberg monsters, that's this David Cronenberg. He creates body horror, and it will probably blow your mind. So I hope you join us for that next week. Again, Videodrome, 1983.
All right.
Well, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter, both at Ardent Cinema. Otherwise, I don't have any social media, but I believe Danny does. So if he wants to give out or shout out his social media, go ahead.
Well, yeah. So you can follow me on Danny Alexander G on Instagram, and you can follow my bands Lipstick Alley Inc. and Shadow Reborn. If you loved this movie, I think you actually would enjoy the band because we are
because you're vampires.
Yeah,
corporate synergy.
Basically. That's probably why I love this film so much. It definitely is in my realm Realm of the Wicked. That's our new album.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Good segue.
So,
and by the way, you guys can find all of these links and all of these social media pages in the description of this podcast. So please take a look.
Hope you guys enjoyed that very spooky episode.
Oh.
And goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Until next time.